So I'll put it like this for, hi there, for, I think you'll be able to see all the messages coming in as well.
Oh yeah, cool. I'll let you
Yeah.
kind of be the one managing the questions, and I'll stay focused on
And
the
so
screen.
yeah, and I also have loads of questions on my phone that have been coming in through like various messages, but I've put them all together. And I'm sure people will have lots of messages as well. So let us know in the chat box if you can hear us okay, if you can see us okay. You know, and I mean, I've been really sad that we've not been able to have our event. You know, I should be putting signage everywhere. I should be making the fire pits, and
Oh,
you know, it's a strange. You know, it's quite a big part of our year because we come from everywhere, and you know, there's a really strong bond between people that initially we didn't know, but I think. And I was really unsure about creating something online because we're so drawn, you know, it's such a physical experience. You know, we swim in the sea, we sleep outside, you know, we're like our senses are so sharpened by the experience. And I was really worried about having something that is quite impersonal because of the screen. But actually my experience of it has been completely different. I cried on Tuesday during Sarah's meditation. You know, there was, and also all the giggles in the chat, you know, it's different, but it's really powerful too. So I'm really happy to be welcoming people like you. And I think there is a space for us to create something that is not a substitution, but is an evolution, and that's okay, you know. And but yeah, so well, you know, this, yeah. So this is our virtual campfire. You know, just imagine the crackling and you know the wind on our skin, and yeah, it'll be nearly like we're there.
well, that all sounds wonderful, and I would absolutely love to be in Scotland. Scapa Fest was no question one of one of the things I was most excited about this year, and just hearing you describe it is tantalizing, and you know, reminding me that a world out there exists, and that campfires with people that you love and connection and touch exists. But we will get back to that in a relatively short period of time. And for now, we're doing what we have. We're using what resources we have available to us to connect, to learn, to grow, and you know, make sure we come out of this situation hopefully better off than when we went into it.
Absolutely. And you know, I'm sure you've noticed that as well, but you know, we've had to learn new skills in such a short period of time. And for a lot of people, it's unusual, you know, it's unusual to be put in a really uncomfortable position of not knowing how to do something. But the thing is, we've all done it, and suddenly you've got nearly an entire world that's homeschooling and working from home, and you know, like spending more time in the kitchen, spending more time actually just, you know, like being still physically means that you can really explore inside, and it's really scary. But I have found it this, you know, incredible experience of presence. I've been more present, and I thought I was present before, but this was not like this. I hope I had this kind of, you know, life balance that felt good, but actually it wasn't there. It wasn't there, you know. It's this stillness has brought so much good, so much good. So
Well, I hope many people will have share that same experience with you, and experience deep presentness, because that's one of the most special things on earth, I think.
absolutely, yeah. So come on, let's start, because I think people are gonna, you know, trickling in. Um, Hi, Brig. So it looks like sound and image is good. Hi, everybody. So welcome, everybody. This is day 4 of the Scapa Fest. And tonight we're welcoming Rob Greenfield, who is this absolutely inspiring person who has spent many, many years leading the way, leading by example, and has changed the lives of quite a few of us. So, Rob, I've been following your journey over the last few years. I think the first time I became aware of your work, of your projects, of your research, was when you spent a year. Was it a year or was it a month walking with your rubbish, trash attached to you?
That was just a month. To do that for a year would be pretty hard. So that was a month.
That was a month, and that was, and I think that's the first time I became aware of you. And I loved how there was several things, but I think, there was this element of provocation that I think was important. And it's important sometimes to do the thing that disrupts, but in such a way that is not this. So you can disrupt in a very destructive way, and then you can disrupt in a very creative way. And you are disrupting in the creative way and in a nurturing way. And I love this. This is so much part of the Scapa experience as well. So that's my experience of you to begin with. And then from then, I just, you kind of entered my ecosystem, and you've been there ever since. It's a really beautiful, it's a massive pleasure to welcome you, here. And I know there's a lot of people in the Scapa community. A lot of people are following what you do as well. A lot of people are inspired by you. I think the year you spent foraging has triggered a lot of curiosity in us. And I was especially touched by the moments that you shared with the entire world, the moments that were hard, the moments where, like any adventure, there's hardship. And, it made it, I think, change is hard, and change is beautiful. But I think I loved how authentic and I love how transparent you were about, the successful moments, but also the hard moments. And I think that, that made me connect with you from a distance so much more. So I'm going to stop talking. Over to you.
Well, I just want to say that I feel the connection. I can feel a strong community with everyone involved in Scapa, even though I'm not in Scotland and we haven't met in person. I really truly feel a strong sense of community right now, which I didn't know I would, but just coming on this call, I definitely feel it. And I'm so happy to hear that my life has been positive to you over the last 4 years, and that you've gained from it, and that other people, your friends and people in the Scapa community have gained from it. Sometimes sometimes it's hard. I know, I'm not delusional. I know my life is impactful on other people. Obviously, I spend a lot of time on social media, and it's my life's work to positively impact other people. But when I hear that sometimes, sitting here alone in a room on a farm in southern France, it's actually it's amazing to hear that I've been able to, from afar, be a positive part of other people's lives. And if that's the case, then that for me is a life well lived. And if I can live transparently and honestly and openly, then that's exactly what I want. What I discovered was a lack of transparency in a way was living a life of lie, of a lie. If you're not being truthful with your stories and with who you are, then it's sort of a baseline coming at the world as a lie. And I decided I want to be fully open and transparent. And that's what I try to do on my adventures by being fully open and transparent, is bring people along on these journeys. And hopefully a year of growing and foraging all my food, I'm the one doing it, but the people following along, their lives can be changed too by coming along on the raw adventure with me.
Exactly.
And so today we're talking about my most recent project that I finished, which is a year of growing and foraging 100% of my food. So a year with no grocery stores, no restaurants, nothing packaged or processed, nothing shipped long distances. Literally everything that I ate for an entire year had to either come from my gardens that I grew or that I foraged from nature. And I'm saying nature because the whole world is nature. Nature is the world. But it's just one of those simple ways that we're still able to understand a concept through our language. So a lot of people would expect, okay, in order to do that, he must have been really experienced in gardening and foraging. And that wasn't actually the case at all. So I arrived, well, first of all, why did I do this? And I'm going to talk for about 10 or 15 minutes. And then really we're going to give this as an opportunity for you to ask questions. I'm really excited to really answer your questions, but I want to give a bit of a baseline just to go into it and to share the story.
Great.
But in 2011, I woke up to the truth of our global industrial food system. And I realized that the system was largely broken. It was destroying millions of people's lives, billions of people's lives, tens of thousands of species going extinct per year. I realized that our food system was seriously broken and causing serious destruction. And I realized that I was a part of it. Basically, I realized that the food I was consuming the planet that I loved. Mm-hmm. So I wondered, is it possible to step outside of this system? But I wasn't ready to find out myself yet. I started to change my life. I started to eat more local food, eat more organic food, not eat factory farm meat anymore, and source sustainable foods, not create so much garbage with the food I was eating by buying whole foods and unpackaged foods. And so that was about 10 years ago, I started on my journey of food freedom from corrupt corporation and lobbyists and government, and a deeper connection to my food and my communities that produce the food. Mm-hmm. So fast forward to 2017, 6 years later, I decided I was finally going to answer that burning question of, could I step away from that food system completely? And I got to Orlando, Florida. I arrived there with a backpack with everything that I owned fitting in it, which was about 111 possessions at the time. And I had never grown food in the state of Florida. I had done very little foraging, just berries, raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, some greens like dandelion. And I had done a lot of fishing in my life. So very little foraging. And I had another problem, besides having very little experience, and especially very little experience in Florida. Well, I had no land of my own. So I had to figure out how I was going to do it. Mm-hmm. And what I did is I immersed in my community right away. I talked to people in my community and I proposed the idea of growing my food in their front yards. Mm-hmm. And the idea was that I would transform their lawn into a garden and they could eat all the food they wanted. And after my 2 years in Florida, the garden would revert back to theirs and they would be able to continue it for as long as they wanted. Mm-hmm. So the idea was to create a really mutually beneficial relationship where we could both meet the needs that we have by working together.
Okay.
So within a few weeks, I started to plant, and I was lost when I started. I was going to the internet and searching, how much water does a carrot need? And how much sun does kale need? And, how do you start plants from seeds or in a greenhouse, or do you plant them right in the ground? And how far apart do you plant them? And how many seeds do you plant? And I was lost. And, but I was, yes, mm-hmm. But I was determined, and I was, the big key was that I got involved with my community. I went to local gardening classes. I picked up local gardening books. I got involved with the local permaculture chapter called Orlando Permaculture. And that's how I learned. I went out foraging. There's a local forager called Green Dean who has a YouTube channel called Eat the Weeds. And I went out foraging on his classes. And I went out foraging with anybody who knew foods in the area. And I went over to as many gardens and food forests as I could. And so as I was learning, I was planting. And the plan was that after 6 months, I would go from 0% to 100%.
Okay.
And 6 months turned into about 10 months. And one of the reasons was because this wasn't just about feeding myself. This was about changing the community that I was in. And so I started 3 community initiatives: Gardens for Single Moms, and we built gardens for 6 single parent families in the neighborhood. Community fruit trees, and we planted over 100 fruit trees in the community that are publicly accessible to everyone. And then Free Seed Project. And the first year we sent out 2,000 free seed packs to people in all 50 states to help them grow their own food. So I was also not just busy growing my own food, but I was busy helping the community to grow their own food as well. So it ended up taking 10 months, and November 11th, 2018 was the day that I began. And on day one, the meal that I had for breakfast was the first meal of my entire life that I had ever grown and foraged 100% of every ingredient.
What was it?
So when it was a smoothie, and it had some fruits that I foraged from trees, different greens from the garden, and turmeric, and and honey from my bees. And I only had a little bit of honey at that time, so that was very precious.
Wow.
So I was really jumping off the deep end, and I jumped into it, and it was certainly difficult. I started to feel the benefits of it almost immediately. After a couple of weeks, I felt like my digestion was the best that I had felt it in years, just from eating 100% off the land, whole foods. And the rules were, a lot of people think, okay, growing and foraging 100% of your food, well, surely you're buying your salt and your oils, or maybe your flour, and surely you can go over to friends' houses and eat, at the potluck. So no, when I say 100%, I mean every single ingredient. The salt I had to get from the ocean, oil I had to make from coconuts.
I remember this. Yeah. I remember that, in the beginning it was hard, right?
Well, I never was successful with oil. So the first 9 months I just didn't have oil.
Yeah.
So that basically no exception. So no going to my friends' pantries, no eating from other people's gardens, and no dumpster diving either. A lot of people have seen that I've done dumpster diving for food, partly to feed myself, partly to raise awareness about food waste, but no eating food from dumpsters, because I wanted to step away from the global industrial food system. So over the year, I grew 100 different foods in my gardens, and I foraged over 200 different foods from the wild, whether it was fishing, foraging for mushrooms, eating weeds from backyards or front yards or parks, foraging for fruit trees. For example, there's mango trees all over South Florida where I would go, or coconuts at the beach. And so a wide diversity of different foods. And one of the things that was really beautiful about the year is that I also did the entire thing without any pesticides or herbicides or fungicides whatsoever. So I did have pest problems, but mostly my strategy was plant a lot of food, so it's okay if some of it's eaten by other species.
So enough for everyone. Yeah.
Enough for everyone. There were some truths, like, for example, squirrels kept eating my plant-based proteins that I was trying to grow, like peanuts and sunflowers. And so squirrels ended up becoming my protein. There was a huge abundance of them in my neighborhood. That was controversial. Some people thought it was great. Some people not so much. But that's one of the truths, and we can go into this later, is that by deeply connecting with my food over this year, I learned a lot of the truths behind our food. And a lot of people like to sit at home eating the food they buy from the grocery store and then point fingers at someone else who's eating squirrels, but they don't realize that squirrels are dying to get the food to the grocery store, whether it's on the farm or in the transportation or because of polluted air, water, or land, to get that food to the grocery store, even if it's vegan. So that's one of the, big takeaways is I like people to, it's really about questioning the truth behind our food. Where does it come from? How does it get to us? And what does the impact that it has on the earth?
Yeah.
So for the year, I also had to grow my own medicine. So everything that I put in my mouth, literally everything except I could kiss. So, you could maybe call that foraging in
Wow.
one way or another.
Yeah.
But basically everything, whether it was food or medicine, I had to grow it. So the saying is, let thy food be thy medicine and let thy medicine be thy food. And that was what I lived to the truest extent for the year. So I had turmeric and ginger from my garden. I made elderberry syrup from elderberries that I foraged and honey. I made it through the whole year without getting sick once, which was really, for me, a beautiful testament in taking care of ourselves and putting good things into ourselves. And definitely had my ups and downs through the year. About halfway through, about 7 or so months in, I started to feel a little deficient in fat and protein because I was not successful with fishing, or I was less successful than I would have liked to have been. And it's very hard to get enough protein just from plants when you don't have a grocery store or a farm to get them from. And so I was becoming kind of deficient, and I was a little worried, like, am I going to be able to keep going? My brain felt a little foggy. My body, was really stretchy, kind of loose, a little bit hanging.
Okay.
I hadn't really lost weight. I started at 153 pounds and I was 149 pounds. So less than 2 kilos of weight loss in 7 months, which is about as little as you can possibly imagine, about as, even as you could hope for. So I had gotten plenty of calories, but I started to feel deficient. And after really many days of struggling fishing, I finally started to catch some nice fat lake trout, which are very high in fat.
Yeah.
And then I also collected some deer after a month of trying. I finally started, as it started to become fall and the deer started to become more active, I managed to start getting some deer that were hit by cars. People would call them roadkill.
Well, I remember, and it was quite controversial as well. Like I thought that was, it was a beautiful act of balance, but I think a lot of people were absolutely horrified by this.
Yes, a lot of people were horrified, and a big part of that is that people have they get a couple visuals of something in their lifetime, maybe from a movie, where things are not reality. And they go from thinking the deer walking in the woods, one day the deer's walking in the woods, and then the next instant they have in their mind is a maggot covered rotten thing on the side of the road. Well, guess what? There's a middle ground. When a deer gets shot, a hunter can chase it down. It takes time. Well, when a deer gets hit by a car, it doesn't just all of a sudden morph into this other form. As long as you get it soon enough, it's still a deer. And it's always, of course, it's still a deer. That's why I don't even like to call it roadkill. It's a deer that was killed by a car, first and foremost.
Yeah.
And for me, this was a big game changer. I got the fat and the protein that I needed, and I finished off the year weighing 152.6 pounds. So about within a pound or a half kilo of what I started. And I finished off the year feeling the best that I've felt in my adult life. I was actually just looking back at some pictures, and it's been 5 months now, and I'm like already a little more, I got excess fat, and I'm weak again after getting back on the industrial diet and not having to work for my food. I looked back and I was in the best shape of my life just from having to be deeply connected to my food and go out every day and forage and grow it.
I think, as you said, it's the lifestyle that went with that, It's, it's working the ground. It's, it's the physical movement that comes with that as well. It's,
Yeah.
it's all connected. Your body rhythm must have been completely different. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really been following this because it was, I don't know, I was, watching this from the little window of my phone and, feeling very connected and curious about this. Because for me, food, our food system is so broken and we're so disconnected from this. And, and I think as soon as we can get back to connecting people with their food comes from, things are going to recover. Because then, and as you said, you didn't have land, but there was land. It just wasn't yours, but they were
Yeah.
available. And again, so it's
Absolutely.
all those mindset shifts that that people need to go through, that we need to go through. Cool. So
Yes.
I see questions popping up already, and then I've got loads on my phone, but
Perfect.
we'll start with the question I've just received. So yeah, please prepare your questions and you can pop them in there's a Q&A button, I think, or in the chat box, and I'll pick them up. So first question from Jill. So they might not all be related to the food project. I think it'll
Okay.
be, yeah, but I'll just take them in that order, okay? So Jill is
Sure.
asking, how do you engage positively with others who don't share your perspective and ideology?
Sure. I love to talk about these sorts of things because this is life. This is life we're talking about here. We're just trying to live good lives, be a good part of our community, have good relationships, feel good about life. And so that's absolutely key. I just want to say one last thing about the project before launching the questions. And that is just simply that although I did this on my own, I was the only person growing and foraging all my food. The whole thing is it was about community. All I wanted to do was see if it was possible, provide an extreme example to, excite people, to wake them up, to shake them up and shake up the system. But it was all about working with my community. It's not about doing this alone. There's no need for any of us to grow and forage all of our food alone. We can do this with community. Sure, it's work. But if you love what you're doing, if you're outside working with nature, if you're working with people you love, is it really work or is it just time well lived?
Yeah.
And so just wanted to say that. As far as the question from Jill, it was, how do I, relate with or deal with people who are
Share your
not,
perspective. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah. Well, okay. The number one thing for me is just always, well, there's many things, but one is that I want to treat everyone with respect, the respect that they deserve. No matter what people are doing, I do believe that they deserve respect. All of us as humans do. So I try to practice patience and compassion towards all people. And this also works really well because when people are treated well, they're more likely to positively receive a message. Another big part about it is that when people are really cut off from the earth and they're cut off from this way of life, I don't blame any individual for that. I look at the bigger problems that have stemmed from society, the society that they were born into and a part of. This world has such a push of consumeristic, mindsets and corporations that have billion-dollar advertising budgets between them and media and governments that are pushing a certain way. I really don't blame anyone because those are some very powerful things, and it's to step outside of that, it takes real courage and it takes a real ability to stand out and step up. So just remembering for me that the issues that I see stem from the greater problems of society, that lets any pressure off the relationship I have with that one individual person. and that helps me to be able to communicate with them in a way that's not judgmental, that's not pushing my way upon anybody. So those are a couple thoughts. One other thing is just, there's 7 billion people out there, and there's millions of people who are waking up to the reality of the situation that we're in and that want to change their life. So what I've chosen to do is pour my energy into the people who have woken up, who want to change their life, but they don't know how, or they don't feel the power, and give them my power. By doing that, that puts more power into me via a positive feedback cycle. I can put 10 times more energy into one person who doesn't want to change, and it can suck my energy, or I can put that same amount of energy into 100 people, and that can feed the energy right back into me. And so that's what I've decided to do, is not focus on any one person, but instead focus on the people who want help now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So all the questions are coming, and I'm going to try to put them in a bit of a sequence, but it might jump in down between topics. I hope that's okay.
Sure.
So Ailey is asking, how long did you spend working your garden each day?
So basically between the gardening, the foraging, the processing and preserving of foods, the cooking and the cleaning, mm-hmm. I figured that I was spending between 20 and 80 hours per week on food. So it varied depending on the time of the year and the season and what I was doing. And some days I might be out fishing all day long, and other days I might be in the garden all day long. Some other days I might be in the house preserving food all day long. So it was highly varied all throughout the year. And definitely towards the end, it became less work as I got things figured out. But the hardest weeks were definitely 80-hour work weeks. But again, a really important thing to point out is I love fishing. I love foraging for mushrooms. I love being in my garden. So it's time doing exactly what I want to be doing. So it's not even worth quantifying. Mm-hmm. It's just time well spent. It's just life well lived. Mm-hmm. But being very realistic, yes, it takes work and it is challenging, but it's rewarding and wonderful, purposeful, passionate way of living.
Tanya is asking, what did you eat after you finished the year? And was there anything in particular that you were really craving or that you missed?
Oh, this is funny because towards the end of the year, that was the number one question people would ask, like, what's the first thing you're going to eat? And I really despised that question because I didn't want to think about it. It put a lot of pressure on it. And it's funny because this is the first time that question's been asked in a while, and it didn't create any of that pressure. So I'm released from it. So thank you. That's nice. But I wanted to work my way back in slowly. So the first thing that I ate was a coconut that someone else foraged that gave me, and it was one of the sweetest coconuts I ever had. And then at dinner time, I had a little potluck celebration where people brought foods, and it was the mostly local potluck. So the idea was that people tried to source their meals mostly local. And so that was my first meal. And I still do a lot of foraging where I'm staying right now. A lot of the food that I eat comes off the land. But as I'm traveling, I stay with a lot of people and I eat what they're preparing. So I eat a lot from grocery stores and restaurants right now. But my plan is to get back to the land soon enough.
Amazing. So Linda is asking, was the weather ever temperamental to your gardens? I guess you were in Florida, so I'm really unfamiliar with I'm really unfamiliar with the weather in Florida. Sorry, my little boy is asking, François. And so was the weather ever temperamental to your gardens? And if it was, what did you do to compensate?
Yes, definitely. So a lot of people would comment on social media and they say, oh, you can only do this because you're in Florida. Mm-hmm. And try doing this in a cold climate. And the people in Florida say, you can't grow food in Florida. It's too hot here. It's too sandy. There's way too many insects. The grass is always greener on the other side, from what I've seen. Every place has its pros and its cons. The interesting thing about Florida, for most people who grow annual foods like carrots and beets and cabbage, annuals are, plants that you plant and they harvest them and then they're dead. They last for, one season.
Yeah.
So the thing is, it's so hot there in the summer that most gardeners consider Florida like the winter. The summer in Florida is like the winter for gardening. A lot of gardeners just take it off because it's so hot, and because there's no freezing, there's not many freezes. There's not these big cycles that kill off a lot of the insects. And because our growing season is so long, it's about 30 degrees Celsius every day for over 6 months. So because our growing season is so long, so is the growing and the reproductive season for insects that want to eat the plants. Also, Florida it used to be under the ocean. So where I grew my food, it started out as almost straight sand with very little nutrients, and that doesn't hold water. So there's a lot of challenges in growing food everywhere. So yes, weather was very hard, but the number one key is to plant the plants that are adapted to the region that you're in. So, and the other key is perennials versus annuals. Planting the plants that are developed, like for example, an apple tree is a perennial. You plant that and that can be producing apples for the next generation. Rhubarb, you plant that and 25 years later, you can still be harvesting rhubarb. So in Florida, I was planting lots of perennials that were heat tolerant and that would actually flourish through the heat of the summer and that were growing year round. And so the heat was my main challenge, but also in the winter, we do get freezes. So in my first year, there were 5 nights that went below freezing. And so it's a tricky place because you're growing, plants that are heat tolerant, but also you can risk losing everything in freezes when you plant things that can't handle freezes. So it's a tricky place, but it's also an abundant place, Central Florida in particular, where I was.
So yeah, it's really, it's really interesting what you said, but actually, it's funny how people perceive limitations, but actually, as you said, did you use a lot of permaculture principles in terms of how you planted things and, like the height of some crops, sheltering the later ones that are maybe slower to sprout, or, did you use a lot of those principles when you started?
Yeah, for me, I would say permaculture comes naturally as a way of life to me. I took my permaculture design certificate in 2016 2016, and I learned a lot. But for me, permaculture is also just a form of common sense. It's just about, one of the main like theories of permaculture that sticks to me is working with the earth rather than against it. And that has come naturally to me for quite some time. Even when I was a consumer, I still wasn't the type of person that would think about spraying things with pesticides when I could just use a shovel to pull up the weeds, for example. So yes, definitely practice permaculture. And for me, it's just kind of a basic way of thinking about working with the earth rather than destroying it.
Boris is asking, so I think you touched upon this at the beginning. Did you find it easy to find someone to share the land with? How did you go about asking people?
Yes, I like to answer this in 2 parts. One is my reality, and my reality is that wherever I go, generally people know that I'm coming, and wherever I go, there's generally people that follow my work and have for a while. And so for me, it was easy because when I say I want to plant gardens in people's yards, within weeks, I had a waiting list longer than I could ever deal with.
Okay.
So for me, it's easy. Now, and then I want to give the answer for someone who's not in a situation like me, and that is, how you would do it without social capital,
Mhm.
like I have created. And here's the deal. Millions of people have woken up to the fact that th- that there isn't what they want. They want a new way of life. And for a lot of people, that new way of life incorporates a garden. However, they don't know how to do it. They don't have the skills. Maybe they don't have the time because they're so busy, stuck in the rat race. So when someone says, hey, I'll turn your yard into a garden and you don't have to do any work, there are a lot of takers. So you can put it out there, put it on Craigslist, put it in local Facebook groups, put notes up at your local grocery store, or if there's a health food store. There's a website called Shared Earth. I think it's sharedearth.org or sharedearth.com. And that's where you can match up with people who have yards and people who want food and people who want to grow food. So if you want to grow food in other people's yards, if you put the energy into it, you can make it work. And worst case scenario, you can just literally knock door to door and tell people what you want to do, and just send them a link to my YouTube video if they don't get it, and show them what's possible.
Okay. So Beth is asking, how do you think we can scale this up to make it accessible in other contexts, other climates? For example, in less warm and more hostile climates like Scotland, or within communities that have limited capacities to do so? And any pointers for community engagement? So I think, again, you've touched upon this a little bit, but maybe we could expand.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as far as whether it's a cold climate or a warm climate, there's nothing that has to be done. Already millions of people grow incredible amounts of food in cold climates. And the reality is that most of the most self-sufficient people that I've seen are in colder climates. Colder climates are a wonderful place to grow food. And the big key is you have to produce the food in the growing season. So, starting as early as you can in the spring and harvesting through the summer, and then preserving the bounty that you can get in the fall. If you have a couple of apple trees, it's amazing how many jars of applesauce you can make to bring yourself through the winter. So as far as cold climates goes, nothing has to be reinvented. It's already being done. I've met many people who grow and forage 80% of their food in cold climates. So that's, totally doable and totally being done. As far as scaling it up, I guess I'm hesitant with that, because in some ways, sure, scale it up, but in some ways the idea is keeping it small. It's about people with their own backyards connecting with their food. Growing food isn't actually that complicated, and it's about getting started. You have to start where you are. That might mean just starting with, one raised bed. And then next year having a few raised beds, and then eventually maybe turning your whole yard into a garden. Now, community, but for me, it is really about community. So intentional communities, living in community is one beautiful way where you can share workload and you can have more space that is worked and managed together rather than having to do things on own. And that could be, a community where you all live together, or it could just be coming together with your neighborhood and working together and exchanging. Community gardens are a great way to do this. So taking abandoned lots, for example, and turning those into community gardens where you can work together. Urban farms, it's amazing what you can do on a quarter of an acre or a half an acre, how much food you can produce. That's a way to scale it up by working together. Farms in general, small farms coming together as a cooperative farm, for example, is a beautiful method. So all of the solutions are already happening, and it's been happening for a very long time. And although the industrial global food system has its tentacles all across the world, the reality is that the statistics that I've seen is that 70% of food is actually still produced by the people, not by the industry. So yes, the industry has wrapped its tentacles around the whole world, but still people all over the world are producing a large amount of their food. We might not see it, but when you start really looking for it and you start opening your eyes, you'll see that it's happening.
Sophie is asking, what kind of revolution do you see or do you hope to see happening in the new world after this period of lockdown? Do you think there'll be a better equality in the environment and the food production?
My thought is that most likely coronavirus is a hiccup, a speed bump in the path of continuing to overconsume resources, in the continuation of great inequality and injustice. I think that millions of people are waking up, just like they did in 2009 during the housing market crash. And I think millions of people will change their life and change their communities. But I don't think that this is going to set us down a path of sustainability, equality, or justice. And I think that there is a good chance we will actually ramp up consumerism pretty quickly to prop up economies. So I think that, many good things are going to come out of this. But I think that it's not going to utterly change the course of humanity. It will utterly change the course for many, many people. But I think that governmental solutions many of them will rely on technology and, relying on vaccines made in laboratories and, focusing on still extractive means of dealing with problems, which is what is currently being done. Governments today are not, sure, they're doing things a little bit differently, but it's all still a means of extracting resources from one area in order to prop things up. So, I'm very hopeful for many people out there. Many people are going to change their lives for the better, but I don't see society changing as a whole.
Going back to the foraging experience, Linda is asking, how did you cook your food? Was it a traditional kitchen? Was it off-grid? How did it work for you?
Yeah, in my dream world, it was all completely off-grid. But in my real world, growing and foraging all of my own food was extremely difficult. And I actually found myself really needing energy inputs. So I had a deep chest freezer, for example. In my first tiny house in Orlando, I was off the grid, but I went to the grocery store and they were not off the grid. Once I started to be this self-sufficient in food, I actually found it harder because I needed to be able to store a lot of food. And not to say that it can't be done, I just didn't achieve it. So as far as cooking, I had a propane stove and I just had a big propane tank that I would fill up every couple months at the hardware store down the street. I cooked some in my solar oven, but the reality is I didn't use it nearly enough. I did transition to having a methane biodigester, and probably about a third of my food was cooked with the methane that I trapped from food waste, mostly that I actually collected via a community composting program that I made in my community. And then I also cooked over a fire when I was doing large pots of soup or boiling down salt water. My kitchen was outdoors. It was all rainwater. So I harvested rainwater and my sink was a gravity-fed basin with rainwater, and all of my water, I was completely off the grid there. I had a compost toilet and I did humanure, and all my water from showering and from my kitchen was gray water that was used to grow food as well.
Brilliant. And so, did you build a tiny house yourself?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. This was my first time building a tiny house, and I had about 40 people who helped. I made it a community event because there's so many people who are super excited about tiny houses that to get to come together and build one and actually see one, that's an awesome opportunity for them, and to get to come together and meet other cool people. In Orlando, a lot of people don't know there's other people who care about this stuff. So I like to bring people together so they can make new friends through these sorts of projects. So yes, I had a lot of people come together and we built the house together. And then at the end, I gave the house to a community called Sustainable Kashi. We took it apart, put it on a truck, my friend's truck, and they put it back together at Sustainable Kashi, where it's now a house for woofers to stay in.
Amazing. And what prompted this project in particular? Like, what prompts your adventures? What prompts those year-long projects or month-long projects? You know, is it through conversation with people? Is it like a big yearning in you that, you know, how does it happen? Just talk me through your thought process when that happens.
Sure. It's definitely both of those things and a few other. From a baseline standpoint, I have always been an extreme person, someone to push the boundaries, even from a young age. That was just natural inside of me. I have also been an entertainer for a long time. I was nominated the class clown my senior year of high school, for example. So from a young age, from about the time I was about 11 or 12 is when I really started to come into this place as a comedian or an entertainer. So I had these sort of things within me. Exploration was always in me as well, just a desire to see the world, to understand the world. I was always very curious with just an insatiable quest for knowledge and a curiosity. So all of that is already within me. And then I woke up and I realized the problems of the world, and I wanted to be a part of the change. First, so that was part of it. I wanted to be a part of the change, but I wanted to live a life of truth. I wanted to live in a way that I knew my life wasn't destroying the very world that I lived on, and where my life was not creating inequality and injustice. And so what I decided to do is basically wrap my desire as an entertainer and as a comedian, my desire for attention, because that's naturally part of me. Like I like people's attention. So I said, well, okay, this is an innate part of me. I like attention. How can I actually make that something worthwhile and good for humanity? In the past, my attention grabbing stuff was, more meaningless. How could I take it and actually make it meaningful to society while meeting my basic desires and needs as a human being? And so that's when I decided to do environmental adventures. So it's about my desire to entertain, educate, and inspire other people, both for my own personal desires and for my desire to, my basic common sense that we don't want to destroy this world. Mm-hmm. But then also a big part of it is just, I want to explore what's possible. I want to push the boundaries. And so all these projects that I embark on have two big things. One, it's something I really want to do. I want to learn about it. I want to explore. I want to deeply immerse. But two, it's a journey that I can take other people on that they'll immerse in and that can inspire them, educate them, and help them to change their own lives to be a more positively contributing member of society. Mm-hmm. I would say those are really the big elements behind how it works. And again, for me, the big driving thing is it's about seeking truth. It's about, overcoming corruption and lies. And it's about this basic idea that I have that in an advanced world that we live in today, I think that it's reasonable that everybody should have enough food and shelter and their basic needs met. And so for me, this is common sense that I'm trying to get out there through these projects.
Mm-hmm. It's really hard to put in a sequence that doesn't jump up and down.
That's all right. It works.
I think, yeah. So we have Michaela who's asking, so your year growing your own food and only eating your own food, how did it impact your social life if you can eat other people's food? For example, when you were gathering with people, because presumably you were not sitting on your own for 12 months, you were involved in your community and you were spending time with people. And how, I guess, yeah, that's a really good question. How do you do when you can't share food in communities?
Yeah.
Food is the bond between people.
Yeah. Yes, it was very difficult. I definitely, in some ways, sort of removed myself from society and from my friends, in that I couldn't share the basic enjoyment of their meals, and people couldn't offer me, and and really, people wanted to be a good host and food when I stayed with them or visited them, and so it was very difficult. But to step back a little bit, I've been immersing in these sorts of projects for 7 years now, and even before then, I did other sorts of things that really kind of set me apart. And so for me, it just comes naturally to be sort of separate in that way while still together. And people know, most people know what I'm up to. And so going into it, they know that I'm already going to be doing something different. So that helps. I don't have to drop the bomb on them that I can't eat any of their food, because they kind of already know it because they've watched it on YouTube or we've talked or something before. But it definitely was difficult because I didn't really want to go to potlucks so much,
Okay.
and restaurants and things like that. And our social life really revolves around food. But I found a balance. I had people over, and I fed many, many people their first 100% homegrown and foraged food. I grew way more food than I needed, so I was able to share it with tons of people. And I often went over to friends' houses and I just brought all the food and then we cooked together. Or they cooked their food and I cooked my food and we could still eat together.
Hmm.
Often I would just bring my meal wherever I went and then eat my meal while they were eating.
Mhm.
So it had its difficulties, but I was able to do a pretty good job. And also, I'm just well versed in doing things very differently from society. So I'm also, pretty comfortable and used to it
Mhm.
already. And so are most of my closest friends. Like, most of my closest friends know there's a good chance that I'll be doing something different from them throughout the day.
Yeah, so yeah, Ailey, yeah, East just answered your question. I think Ailey had a question that was about this. Um, Tanya is asking, so we've got a few minutes left before the end of our session. If people want to stay a little bit longer, it's fine. So Tanya is asking, do you think that this environmentally friendly lifestyle limits a person to finding a partner? Is it possible to be with someone who doesn't share this way of life?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
Does it limit you from a certain number of people? It can. But are there millions and millions of people who share this, viewpoint and way of life? Absolutely. In fact, this is very pertinent. Yesterday, I was reading through some comments on YouTube, and there was one that was caught my eye that was a woman, and she said something like, "I can't believe you dumpster dive.
Mhm.
Rob, I love everything that you do. I'm a big supporter, but not a single woman who's not out of her mind would want to date a dumpster diver. So don't do that." So I actually copied that, posted it onto Facebook, which you can go and see the comments. And I said, any woman out there ever dated a dumpster diver or dumpster dive themselves? Over 300 comments in the last 24 hours of women who dumpster dive or date dumpster divers, or women saying, "I would love to date you, Rob. Not in spite of you dumpster diving, because I love that you dumpster dive and the crazy things that you do."
Yeah.
So if you want some inspiration, go to my Facebook page and read that thread. You will see many people. My friend Julie said, instead of love at first sight, she posted a picture of her and her boyfriend that said love at first dumpster, and a picture of them dumpster diving together. So surround yourself with the people that feel similar to you, and you will find someone who is a real match. And that's what one of the big things that I recommend is, this doesn't have to be a lonely journey. You might have to leave the situation that you're in to really live the life that you're craving and that really fills your soul with that purpose and passion that you're looking for. And so I believe that you are your surroundings too. So the more you can surround yourself with what you want to be, the more you'll become what you want to be. So yes, it can have limitations, but it can also open you up to an amazing relationship. So yeah.
So Tanya, yeah, I hope this answered your question. So we've got loads more questions, some that you have answered partially, but I think if so, please people tell me in the comment if there's something that you absolutely want an answer to tonight. You can ask me. The one thing that I wanted to say as well is that you were on a European tour, and you were booked and scheduled to attend all those amazing events and communities, and all this got quite derailed because of the pandemic. But basically the proceed of this European tour, you want to support non-profits organization that they're led by women, and there's a page on your website that I will communicate with all of you guys that list those initiatives that you're involved in and you want to support. So there's one that really caught my eyes in particular, and it's the Permaculture Women's Guild. They offer low-cost, free courses to women and women communities who want to learn how to really work the land and grow the food. So I had a look today. They have an amazing course that is it's a year-long course, and you've got a mini lesson once a week. And I really recommend you go and have a look at this. We'll be donating some money for them because I feel really strongly about them. And I'm really grateful for you putting them on my path as well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. All the links will come out in an email to everybody who's attended. So I think this is it for tonight. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's always to just turn the computer off after this, because this weird silence when after sharing so much energy. But yeah, so a big thank you to everybody, and please get in touch with me. You know where to find me if you have any questions. And I hope this has inspired you to make some changes maybe, and really sort of push the boundaries and get a feel for those edges and limitations that sometimes are in the way of of us living our best life of creation and nurture and community. Yeah. So I
completely agree. And I just want to say that I love you, Clemence, and I love all of you watching, and it's been wonderful spending time with you all, and hope that one day we'll have a real life hug.
We will. Let's make it happen, okay? So listen, have a beautiful evening, and we'll speak soon, okay? Bye, Rob. Bye, everybody. Thank you. See you
Bye, everyone.
Tomorrow. Yeah, bye.